Get ready because the shipping industry is ripe for disruption. You're listening to Autonomous Ships Headquarters Podcast with your host, JP.
Everybody, welcome to another episode of Autonomous Ships Headquarters Podcast. I'm your host, Jure Pavlica, and as you probably know, the goal of this podcast is to introduce to you people and companies that are behind the digital revolution that is transforming the shipping industry. Today's guest is one of the leading world experts in maritime law. His outstanding career led him from US Navy, Coast Guard JAG, Department of Justice, to being a senior claims executive for the Norwegian company Gard, which is the largest P&I club in the world. His in-depth knowledge of maritime and international law and its applications to novel technologies such as unmanned and autonomous vessels make him a very special guest of ours. Without further ado, meet Sean T. Pribyl. And just one note before we begin. In the meantime, Sean has changed his job and he's now working as a Senior Counsel in Holland Knight, which is a firm in Washington, D.C. Let's go.
Hello, Sean. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, let's start with your background. How did you end up here where you are?
Well, currently I'm in Norway by way of several different places, I suppose. I started with a career path that came from a law firm in Washington, D.C., and prior to that, I worked as an active duty Coast Guard judge advocate, and prior to that, 7 years at sea as a deck officer. Currently, I'm a lawyer and senior claims executive at Guard AS here in Arendal, Norway.
Quite an interesting path you had there. And I've seen that you also joined the US Marine Academy. What was your motivation to do that?
Well, as a high school senior, I came from the, I'm not sure you would call it a seafaring state of Kansas in the middle of America. And I had a desire to see the world and travel away for school. And when I heard about the program at Kings Point, I was hooked. The opportunity to spend 2 semesters at sea and get a merchant mariner license, a degree, and a naval commission all at once.
All right.
And I can tell you that when I arrived, I didn't know port from starboard and did not anticipate a career, a first career, I suppose, at sea, and then a subsequent careers with the Coast Guard and in the practice of maritime law.
Yeah, can imagine. And you said you spent 7 years on the sea as a first deck officer, and after that you enrolled into law school. How did that happen? That's quite an unusual turn of events.
I did. I had I would call it a fortunate career at sea. In 7 years, I was able to see 7 continents and several trips around the world with the various types of ships, from cargo ships, container, break bulk, ro-ro, combination vessels, and then additionally with fiber optic cable ships, all of which different experiences, fantastic opportunities. Again, I had the rare opportunity to see much of the world during that time. I reached a point in my career where I had to make a bit of a fork in the road, where I had to decide to continue to work towards master or to pursue a different career path. And I had a very strong desire to serve on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces, and was drawn to the career path of judge advocates, or JAGs, and went to law schools solely for that purpose, to try to become a JAG. And I was fortunate enough in my 3rd year of law school to be selected for the U.S. Coast Guard, what's called the Direct Commission Lawyer Program, and then served, as I mentioned, 6 years after that on active duty.
Wow, very interesting. Did you have any inspirational figures or mentors along the way? Somebody that maybe pushed you to the next level, or just was a big inspiration for you?
I did, and I would say that at each of my various career path decisions, that I had the opportunity. I was fortunate enough to have mentors at each step of the way. Some very significant and helped me make some of these life-changing decisions. And I would recommend to listeners that, especially younger listeners coming up into the industry, to try to find mentors in their respective career paths, and for older generations to serve as mentors to upcoming professionals.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's an inspiring thought. And what do you do actually at the moment at Gard?
Currently, as I mentioned, I'm a lawyer and senior claims executive here at Gard, and I work primarily on the charters and traders and the defense teams. So essentially, I manage a portfolio of our members within our club, advising them on the wide range of claims that ship owners and charters deal with on a daily basis. I direct and appoint outside counsel to assist on our claims when needed, and help guide our litigation strategy when needed, whether that's at mediation, arbitration, or litigation. I'm also a member of a work group here at Gard that was formed about a year ago that our focus is on autonomous vessels, and we have about 12 or so team members right now from around the world within Gard, from various practice groups, legal, claims, loss prevention. So I serve on that work group as well. We have several members that operate autonomous vessels or at different levels of autonomy. And so it's been a valuable experience as well to actually be on the ground level helping members get the insurance needed to operate their vessels.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned this club a few times. I guess you're referring to P&I Club. And could you maybe just give a brief for people who don't know what a P&I Club, because it's quite an important piece of this puzzle that we're going to talk about.
Sure. Yeah. The P&I clubs are essentially based on this premise that ships don't go to sea without marine insurance. And P&I clubs offer insurance cover under essentially this idea of pooled risk cover. So ship owners, members, charters, whatever they may be, pay their premium to the association. And the idea behind this, when P&I clubs at their inception, was essentially they were developed to help provide assurances to ship owners to pool their risk. So in the case of a catastrophic loss, they would be able to survive financially. So essentially the members, to some extent, share the risk, and we at the club then make decisions in these various claims with a view towards the individual member, but also the association as well. And P&I clubs, the certificate of entry, that a member receives and their proof of entry with a P&I club is sometimes referred to as their ticket to trade. So it's a critical part of the actual maritime industry, and it's the clubs themselves have their own respective rules. So there are 13 what are called the international group of clubs around the world. Gard is the largest and most financially stable club. This gives us the unique opportunity to also be at the forward edge of some of the innovation happening. We are engaged at several different industry groups. We're constantly in contact with regulators around the world. And through that experience have built up an expertise in risk assessment and loss prevention. And we served as the direct conduit to the owners and the operators, hearing their concerns, their needs, and working with them on that ground level to get them to where they want to be. When it comes to ensuring that they have the appropriate insurance that's in place so they can carry on with their commercial endeavors.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that under your P&I club you have several clients or members that are involved in autonomous applications of various autonomy degree. And what is at the moment the high-level legal issues that these clients are incurring when we talk about US, Europe, also regulatory side? Like, what are these high-level issues that they're facing?
Well, there's certainly a wide range of issues that are being looked at. I think from a legal viewpoint in particular, and I can touch on what I would say the lawyers are looking at as compared to what the P&I clubs are also looking at as well. But one of the main issues here is just exactly when it comes to the issue of autonomous vessels, just what are we as an industry referring to these as? Are we referring to them as vessels? Are we referring to them as vehicles? There are several different terms being used, and each of these has a specific importance when it comes to the application under respective international convention, under domestic law. The primary, there's several different conventions in play. I think probably one of the most looked at right now in terms of legal compliance are the actual rules of the road, the collision regulations, COLREGs.
COLREGs, yeah.
And essentially how vessels that operate at a reduced manning level or zero manning level, depending on what their level of autonomy is, or degree of autonomy, I should say, whether those vessels and those operations are able to comply with the current conventions and laws as they stand. Do current conventions and laws need amending? Do we need new laws and conventions to allow for these types of operations to take place? When I mentioned reduced crewing, that certainly calls into play other legal considerations regarding to conventions and laws related to watchkeeping and manning requirements, safe manning requirements. The idea of how vessels can essentially comply with obligations to render assistance at sea. And again, definitions. So the industry has relied on definitions and accepted norms when it comes to terms such as master or person in charge or crew. And the concepts being envisioned now include remote operators, perhaps halfway around the world. How do those operators fit into these legal regimes? Seafarers. Is a remote operator, could they be deemed a seafarer for purposes of applicable regulations and laws? It extends even further into environmental issues, construction and design. Do these vessels? I think that as I touch on this, I should be clear that the first question to ask, I think, in these unmanned vessel operations is to make sure that the conversation is clear on the type of vessel that's being discussed. Is it a small craft, like a survey vehicle used for research, or is it a large ocean-going container ship? And what degree of autonomy is being used? There are certainly competing versions of what that should look like. Currently, the IMO, through the regulatory scoping exercise, is relying on a degrees of 1 through 4. And actually, that was submitted as well by the U.S. Coast Guard as part of their. And the last I'll just mention is the location of the operation. So where will this take place? Will this be in inland waters? Will this be in domestic waters? Will this be on the high seas? And from there, you can begin the conversation of where does this fit into a legal framework?
Yeah, it's a very complicated picture, and in terms of progress, how far are we with these scoping exercises? And I mean, there's probably on every level we're on a different path. But in general, what do you think? How far are we in this regulatory reshuffling, scoping exercises, amendments?
I think it depends on who you ask. I think there are certain countries that feel that they're fairly far along, that they've taken an approach domestically that certainly for testing purposes within their waters, or perhaps even regionally in the Baltic or in Southeast Asia, that their interpretation of the coal regs and various instruments allow for testing and equivalencies when it comes to this perhaps augmented navigation capabilities. And some countries are a bit more reserved and waiting for the final outcome of the IMO's regulatory scoping exercise, which on that point has been somewhat delayed at the Marine Safety Committee due to COVID-19 as we wait for the next development and results of where that stands. That will take several years. That exercise will, the results of that, I should say. So once that exercise is completed, that the committee will be making recommendations, and that will go for more debate and discussion as to what it means. Should the IMO make any changes to current instruments that are under the purview of the scoping exercise? Should the IMO recommend a new convention related to maritime autonomous surface ships, MASS? Or should the IMO just maintain status quo and look to see if there's opportunities under the existing regulations and conventions? That will all be borne out of the exercise itself, but that will take time.
Indeed.
There's no question about it that it takes time to review and make recommendations, and then to actually make changes at the IMO. And that's no different than many countries at the domestic level, including the United States.
But I guess on the domestic level, that's the bleeding edge of the innovation when it comes to legal perspective, right? Because we're first going to solve this on a international/domestic level, and then all of these good practices and the results could be a good input to the IMOs. Is that?
Yes. I think it comes down, for example, in the eyes of the U.S. For example, my experience as a U.S. lawyer there, and in the committees with which I'm engaged there, the focus seems to be waiting for the outcome of the IMO's scoping exercise for purposes of uniformity with those regulations. The idea that U.S. domestic law requires essentially that inland rules and U.S. law comply as closely as possible with the coal regs. So the U.S., I think, is U.S. Coast Guard, for example, which is a regulator for purposes of I would say the lead agency in the U.S. With the actual regulatory compliance of these operations. And I would, from my understanding at least, that they're going to wait the outcome of the scoping exercise, while with the U.S. as well as with other countries looking at domestic laws to see, are there opportunities for waivers, are there opportunities for exceptions and equivalencies to operate under current U.S. law, certainly for testing purposes. And I would say that in the U.S., this is being done by the U.S. Navy and has been done by the U.S. Navy as they look to invest heavily in this space. And so there's opportunity there to learn from what the U.S. Navy has been doing in terms of their compliance with coal regs as the regulators look to enforce and perhaps not enforce, but look to grant the approval so that testing can continue. We can develop the data. We can look at where the commercial opportunities are. and to keep pace with the rest of the world. The U.S. has been at the tip of the spear with innovation for quite a long time, and this is an opportunity to do just that. We have some of the best universities in the world and some of the best people working on these programs. The question is, again, where does it fit in the priority of various countries' culture and investment?
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And now when you mentioned, let's switch gears, because you mentioned commercial applications, and I know that business cases is also, besides the legal aspect of this, is also one of your focus points. You mentioned before something called a three-prong approach when it comes to evaluating business cases. Could you inform us a bit more on that?
Yeah, so this is, and this was from one of our previous discussions that you and I have had on this topic, which is when you look at the commercial development. And I've been fortunate to work with several different clients in the U.S. To help them reach their commercial goals with developing this technology. Here at Gard, working with, as I mentioned, members with to use this technology and newcomers to the market also. And I would say that when you look at the various legal discussions that are taking place around the world on this topic, really what it comes down to is the respective business case that the commercial entity is developing. And if you don't have the actual desire to develop the technology, if you don't have the investment, then there's really no need to get into anything beyond just the theoretical discussion of this. What you are seeing is that there is a desire to build these business case for these respective operations. And that being said, I think that to your question, though, this is three-pronged approach, or a success triangle is what I refer to it as. Is you have to have a combination of three different factors working in concert, really, and that is the first being the government and respective regulators. So that's at both the international and the domestic level. Second, you have to have industry, as I mentioned. So you have to have the innovators, and you have to have the implementers. So people who actually want this technology. On the other hand, innovators are in some cases developing a solution to a yet to be identified problem, but they are developing the business case and out there getting the investment needed to build their respective enterprises. And finally, you do need this legal piece. You need the understanding of what is the current legal framework, what is permissible, what are the current standards, and what will be the future standards for these operations. And that, to me, is both a private counsel issue as well as a government counsel issue. So doing the legal review, this involves academia. There's certainly no shortage of academics that have taken this on, either in the legal community or in the PhD program level. So these three, the regulators, industry, and legal, you really can't have success unless you have all three together. So the regulators need to understand what the industry wants, where it's going, how quickly is it developing. The industry needs to know what are the rules, how do we operate, and the lawyers are the advisors. And I think it's really important here to focus on making sure that on the business side that the commercial operators are really going to experience counsel on this, because there are several different layers of their operations that go beyond just safe navigation and that go beyond regulatory compliance. It gets into domestic issues with product liability. It gets into intellectual property rights.
Yeah, data privacy.
Yes, data, exactly. Privacy, data retention, data collection. So I think it's really important for the commercial operators to seek out the counsel that actually have the ground level experience with this. And I think also, so once again, you can't have success, in my mind at least, without all three of these variables being intertwined and essentially working together.
Yeah, it's a very interesting approach how to tie those things, and essentially you need to solve your issues on all of these three important topics. But besides having a good business case, the motivation does not really need to be profit. It could also be environmental issues. And how does this fit into your approach?
This is one of the most interesting parts about what I would call this this revolutionary. This evolution in technology and what we're seeing in the from both a domestic national viewpoint, so how a country views this technology, and also from a generational view. So how do different generations in the workforce view this technology? And you touch on something that is extremely important here in Scandinavia for sure, which is this idea that this technology is not just about reducing crews on ships. This technology is looked at the bigger picture of a sustainability improver, a part of reducing emissions. Some of these vessels being developed are going to be some type of alternate fuel that is potentially not fossil fuel based, battery powered short sea service vessels, zero ballast ships if possible. So built into these systems is the possibility, at least, of making positive impact on the environment. And to the generational point, I think what I've seen and discussions I've had, at least here in Scandinavia, is that generations that are coming into the workforce now, they may place different priorities in what they want from their employer. So they want to know, perhaps during the interview process, what is the company's sustainability policy? What are they doing in terms of volunteerism? What are they doing in terms of environmental impact? And a younger generation coming up, they may be willing to sacrifice some of the historical. Once again, this is not for everyone. This is a very general statement, but they may be willing to work for companies, or they will only work for companies that have these in place in clear terms. So that for older generations, I think it's important to understand that these priorities may be shifting, and that this advanced automation, which again crosses beyond just maritime, this gets into the land side and the aircraft side, integrated into the port systems, integrated into the intermodal logistics chain. That this is all an emerging area, and it's certainly something to pay attention to as far as where priorities are if companies are looking to attract and retain talent.
Wow, yeah, it's very, very fruitful thought there. Let's switch gears a little bit towards risks and risk assessments. That's one of essentially very important pieces of your work, evaluating risks from a legal perspective. But at the moment, we don't have a lot of data, and we historically know that insurances were largely dependent on good quality and quantity of data based upon which they could evaluate the risks. At the moment, we don't have a lot of data on unmanned accidents because we don't have a lot of these systems deployed. How do we know that actually removing people from ships will lead towards less accidents? Like, what are we relying here on to?
I think this is one of the most important points. I think the idea of where is the data to support some of these suggestions as to what this technology means. I think there's certainly quite a few proponents who believe that this technology, which would include perhaps removing humans from the vessel, or in some cases from the loop overall. There's actually quite a bit of debate of whether that will actually happen, but the overarching idea is that this technology does in fact lead to less incidents, less accidents, and while that's being suggested, and I think that certainly in theory that could be the case, I think what's incredibly valuable going forward is to ensure that there are accurate and well-developed data sets on what is actually happening through testing, and how can we look at that data to actually make decisions based on tangible evidence that yes, the data supports this. I think that the data must be there to support the assertion. I mean, certainly in theory, when you have less people on board, then that vessel, there will be less risk of personal injury, specifically to the people on board.
Sure, that makes sense.
Remove that. So yeah, so that the issue with these data sets though is we can look at the number, the percentage of incidents that are caused, or at least are blamed on human conduct, human actions. What is less clear is the number of incidents, accidents that were avoided by human decision making.
Exactly.
So this would, in the context perhaps of seamanship decisions. So in a situation in which the AI system has to make decisions in a maneuvering and collision avoidance situation with numerous targets, and that's the kind of data that is certainly being developed, and I think it's just that data should be shared to the extent possible. That should be available to commercial operators if it's being developed on the defense side, once again to the extent possible. And I think also when you look at developing this data, I think it's also important to look at whether or not we can commission peer review studies on these issues. So I'm having well-established high-level participants who actually prepare reports on the reduced crewing, comparison to what it actually means in terms of incidents. When it comes to workforce, what does the future workforce of this industry look like? If we reduce manning on ships and move people ashore, is that really what the future workforce looks like? So I think we need a combination of data sets through testing and operations, combined with some additional high-level committee peer review reports on these exact issues.
All right. And do you have maybe an example where you use the data to make an important decision?
Well, certainly within Gard, which is more of an underwriter role, which is a bit outside my purview. So within Gard, we certainly look at the data sets. We look at what our members provide in their concept of operations or their ConOps, in assessing the risk and determining whether it's acceptable risk and to the extent to which that will provide cover. I think that certainly when I was practicing in the U.S. and working with clients in this space, using the data sets that they had developed in testing to take to the Coast Guard and explain why testing should be expanded, continued, why commercial operations make sense, why it's safe. So certainly there is quite a bit of value to the regulator in seeing in clear terms, here is the, for example, number of hours of safe operation without incident, and that can be used then to continue or to expand operations.
All right. And we know that from a technical perspective, a lot of engineers are focused solely on their technical solution. What is, for example, from your experience, some examples where it's just legal consequences or legal aspects of their efforts are just ignored and
Well, I think it's a question of priorities, and engineers and developers are problem solvers by nature, and I think that they identify problems and develop the solution. And I think having worked with several different companies and people within those companies on these issues, I would say that it's often the case where the focus is on the product itself, and the value that lawyers add in these cases is to help identify where are the potential hurdles to operations, because certainly the best way to achieve success for their commercial operation is to identify risk early on, so that they can continue without interruption. You certainly don't want to be testing and halfway through a scheduled testing have a regulator stop your operations because of non-compliance issues.
For sure.
So there's as I mentioned, there's a number of wide-ranging issues with domestic considerations, for example. So product liability, which is largely a domestic law issue. How are engineers and developers looking at product liability issues? How are they protecting their intellectual property? What is their market? Are they looking commercial only? Are they looking defense? Is there a combination of both that they can pursue? And so overall, I think that's I've seen this several times. I've worked with these people are highly intellectual, very driven and focused people, and I think that the role of legal counsel is to support that and to work with them, and it's often beneficial to get in early to help guide the operation and serve in that support role.
That is also part of the services that you at Gard can offer to innovators,
We do.
right?
Yes, exactly. So that's part of what our work group focuses on is because, as I mentioned, there's several different factors that are involved in each of these operations, and at the club we are engaged with classification societies, with international regulators, with different industry bodies, and so it's good to be aware of some of the collateral issues with these operations. It's essentially, when it comes down to the business case, I mean, the reality is it has to be the right decision for that respective member or that client. It's certainly not advanced technology. It may not be for everyone. So it's here at Gard. Yes, we certainly involve everyone with as much discussion as possible. We try to be as involved with our members and truly understanding, to the extent possible, the design system, the AI, what does this mean in terms of compliance? What does it mean with flag state approval?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a wide range of variables that I would just say that it's certainly not a one practice area issue.
Mm-hmm. And so at the moment, what I've seen is that from authority perspective, waivers are essentially given to these novel applications to be tested out. But the legal side is also adopting. And what's next after waivers? I mean, waivers are like a patch, but it's not a real solution. Where are we when it comes to real commercial applications and operation?
Yeah, this is a fantastic point. And for the near term, as we look at where these advanced automation vessels, autonomous vessels, whatever you refer to them as, look at how they fit into the current regime. Once again, there's a different approach domestically versus internationally. You can look at certainly the various countries around the world that are looking internally at their internal waiver process. And most of the testing that I'm aware of, at least, has gone through a combination of domestic waiver for compliance purposes, ensuring, of course, that safety remains paramount. I don't think there's any discussion about that as far as whether there's acceptable risk if it can't be at least stated up front that the measure is being taken to ensure safe navigation. And so you're right, though. It's what does the future hold? And I think, again, it comes back to what's the role of the IMO in this when it comes to international standards. And I think that will be a logical next step is waiting the outcome of that. But certainly when you look at a process at the IMO that could take another 8 years, the technology is already here and it's being implemented. So it's in some cases, I guess the question is whether domestic authorities are going to continue to operate under a waiver or the equivalency standard for the foreseeable future, whether they can look at continued development of industry best practices. We're going to see more from the international standards side on various terminology and systems and design. But in the near term, I think that's likely going to take place because it does take quite a bit to change and amend and alter laws. So that will likely happen until the IMO makes a decision or a domestic or regional agreement that countries may adopt to essentially operate within domestic waters that may require amendment to domestic law. But you're right. This is something that is what's driving this conversation. And once again, there's no shortage of discussions on this around the world right now. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's a short answer to that. Yeah. But certainly the most of the testing that's taking place in China, Korea, Japan, Singapore, Scandinavia, Belgium, the Netherlands, UK. I mean, these are all countries that are looking internally while balancing that with their interpretation of international convention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we talked a lot about technology and the legal side of things, and you covered that very well with your insights. But another critical cog in this mechanism is, of course, people and all of the labor issues that this technology potentially has an impact on. And what do you think? I mean, is it true that people don't want to go to sea and that you will face a huge shortage of labor, and therefore this new technologies will come to rescue? What's happening on that side of the topic?
Well, those are some very good points, and as a former mariner myself, I can say that certainly there can be sensitivities to discussions with certain labor organizations, unions on this topic. So I think it's important to involve labor throughout these processes, which I think they are. For example, in the United States, I can speak to that. And labor meaning not just the crew on board, but also labor in the sense of pilots and that human involvement in that last part of navigation of a voyage. I think that to your question there, I certainly think that whether or not future generations want to go to sea, this is something that's often cited as a reason for this, and certainly that could be the case. I have yet to see a report that includes a survey of sufficient population of future mariners or current mariners who do believe that a future career at sea is not a path that they want to pursue.
Yeah, well,
so I think
I can just interrupt you here because I've seen reports about inland shipping in the Netherlands and in the Belgium, where we see the age of boat masters rising. So it's essentially showing that younger generations, they don't find this appealing to work on and live on an inland vessel. So that's already, I think, an important data point. Not sure how that relates to the rest, but it's something to take into account, definitely.
It's certainly conversations that I've heard here in Norway and through various meetings and in Scandinavian countries, as far as these countries have a long history of seafaring, and yes, these are discussion points. It just depends on how what is that sample population that we as an industry are drawing from. I think we want to be a little cautious and not just paint a picture that an entire generation doesn't want to go to sea anymore, because certainly I've seen counter arguments to that. That being said, I think that developers in this space have acknowledged that this is not about this overnight change to the industry. This is not about removing crew and humans overnight. This is about offering the solutions for commercial operators who want to invest in this technology. For a number of operators, it's an opportunity to also move some of these jobs and from ships to shore and create new opportunities, new specialties that haven't existed. And again, that could be a commercial decision. That could also be a cultural decision. Some countries are looking very closely at how they can innovate for the future. What can they develop for their future workforce? What does that look like? And the idea of inland shipping, certainly this is an area where there has been a several decades of discussion in the U.S. about the future of the inland towing industry and when captains are at the point of retirement, whether they have built up a pipeline of trained personnel that can take over. And that's certainly something that has been looked at closely. This technology is being looked at in the inland system in the U.S., as you mentioned, as well in Belgium and the Netherlands. So it's certainly key points to consider. And again, it comes back to perhaps a high-level peer review level report on future manning with the right organization conducting it. That would be something that would add some value to the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with you. And one other topic that is critical in this discussion is also education, because if we see that, or if we know that the roles of people might change in the future, therefore they need to be re-educated into a new role, or they might be moving from the sea to the shore. So we have these technological developments that are essentially putting a pressure on labor issues. How does this relates with current curricula for mariners and in general for people involved in the maritime industry at large?
Yeah, I think that's also another great point, which is this: where does the education piece fit here? And I think there's a few different points to make on it. One is what level of engagement with the educators. When should this begin? So when should we introduce students to advanced technology? And I think there's a movement that's saying as early as elementary school. There's certainly programs around the world that are focused more on technology and engineering. And then, when it comes to the maritime space, I've seen several initiatives that are focused at beginning at the junior high and high school level, trying to bring in the education piece there, just to introduce future generations to what's happening in this space. And so you have the 2 points being: where does it plug in to current education curriculum? And then what does it mean for the continuing education of the current mariners. And I think it's important to appreciate that current mariners, I think this advanced technology, there's certainly over several decades been advanced automation coming into vessels, from autopilot to unmanned engine rooms to ECDIS and ARPA and advanced navigation tools like that, as well as dynamic positioning. I worked on cable ships, and we certainly had a highly advanced bridge on cable ships with dynamic positioning. So, once again, this is an evolution, not revolution, when it comes to this next level of automation. But it's important, I think, to make sure that current mariners aren't overwhelmed. I think there's lots of discussion out there right now on what can the current mariner, what can the current bridge stander be expected to incorporate. It has to be done smartly. It has to be user-friendly. There are certainly several other training requirements going on for mariners nowadays. So the education piece, I think that needs to be looked at, which I think it is. It's I'm not sure to the extent, but certainly there's several different institutions around the world that are looking at how this fits into their curriculum. And then on the other side, so where does it fit into a career path? So where does it fit in at the high school, the university, the graduate level? And I think that in the United States, for example, several of the maritime schools are looking at how they can fit this and at least introducing students to it. I don't think it's necessarily going to, in the very near future, I don't think it's going to take place of traditional training for matters such as celestial navigation. But over time, I think it will incorporate more. I think technology is here, and it's going to stay in terms of this advanced automation. And so I think it's wise for these schools to take a look at how they can add it. I think that some schools in maritime schools in the U.S. are even going further. They've developed incubators on this technology. They're looking at Maine Maritime is bringing in a program that should be highly advanced with introducing students to remote operations and advanced operations in the maritime transportation system. So I think that there's two different considerations: current mariners and future mariners. And when I say future mariners, I guess that also means the future maritime workforce, because they could be shore-based.
Wow, yeah, that's without doubt a huge topic to discuss, and really appreciate your insightful thoughts into it. But we're unfortunately running out of time, so couple of closing thoughts. What do you say now as an expert in maritime law and insurance to the people who are on one side developing technologies for these novel applications, and also for people who are thinking of going or already in their maritime path, a career path? What would you say to them from your perspective?
Well, from the commercial context, I think it's important to decide, does this technology fit in your business model? Some companies want to be at the forward edge of technology. They're willing to take more risk, and some are more conservative. So I think it's a question of where it fits in your commercial enterprise, and perhaps taking more of a layered approach from, it doesn't necessarily have to be fully autonomous, perhaps augmented technology into certain operations, enhanced navigation capabilities. From the regulator viewpoint, perhaps looking at developing a more advanced navigation system within the marine transportation system. So developing the ACE navigation that have advanced automation capabilities that can help improve safety. I think that really you're looking at to be successful in this space, you really have to look at compliance with the laws and regulations. You have to look at intellectual property. You have to look at insurance. And where are these opportunities for your business? So are they in the commercial sector alone? Are they in the export side? Are they on the defense side? And again, much of this is happening at the academic level because we don't have legal precedent necessarily on incidents related to collisions, for example, or pollution incidents related to autonomous vessels. So, continuing to monitor, looking at previous precedent on mechanical failures on ships, how that may fit in. But for now, much of this lives in the realm of theory when it comes to how courts would decide the liabilities in this space. From the insurer side you mentioned, I think we at the P&I club level, this is certainly a discussion at the international group level. Within Gard, as I mentioned, helping lead the way on risk assessments, and also collaboration with regulators, operators, and industry. And finally, I think data. Again, this is key to this, along with a well-developed ConOps, and knowing when and with whom to connect at the regulator level, I think is critical to successful operations.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing this, and we'll wish you a pleasant transition. And where can people learn more about your work?
Well, there's certainly, I'll be posting on LinkedIn some upcoming projects. So
all right.
Quite a few happening in this space with the American Bar Association next month and the National Academies of Sciences, on which I serve a few committees there also. So much will be developing in the next 6 months, and I'll be posting, I guess, on...
Great. We'll keep a close eye on you, and hopefully we can meet again in the future and discuss some new developments. But until then, thank you so much for this talk, Sean, and wish you a pleasant relocation and the rest of your business endeavors. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all for listening. I hope that you found this episode as insightful and informative as I did. There is without doubt an exciting road ahead for national and international maritime law. In the show notes on the website, you'll find a link to Sean's LinkedIn profile where you can follow him. And if you like this episode, please share it. And of course, if you have any comments, feel free to reach out. See you next time, my friends. And in the meantime, take care. Oi, oi.